pretty wary of the Protestant Christians who may have been in league with the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope. Concerning the proud faith and tradition of these mountain Christians, Dr. Asael Grant recorded his reminiscences. My thoughts went back to the days when the Nestorian missionaries were spread abroad throughout the East, and for more than 1,000 years continued to plant and sustain the standard of the cross through the remote and barbarous countries of Central Asia, Tartary, Mongolia and China, to the time when, as tradition and history alike testify, the gospel standard was reared in these mountains by apostles' hands, for it was not from Nestorius but from Thomas, the disciples Thomas, Bartholomew, Thaddeus and others, that this people first received the knowledge of a Saviour, as well be seen in the sequel. It appears also by letters recently received from Mesopotamia that a considerable number of the Chaldean Christians are very desirous of restoring the independence of their church, and that Mar Elijah of El-Kosh, who claims the Patriarchate of the Chaldeans, has proposed to enter into amicable relations with the Church of England rather than the Roman Popish Church. Because he found them very different compared to the Roman Catholic. George Badger Coakley. About the ambition of the Reverend George Badger Coakley comments. He concluded that Rome was losing its hold on the church and that the Church of England should step in. He thought that he saw an opportunity in the person of Mar Elijah, the Bishop of El-Kosh, nephew of the late Patriarch John, whom was, on the amazing pretext suggested by Barsaum, no doubt, that it was right to, quote, restore the patriarchal dignity to the old line, unquote. He approached the bishop to urge him to claim the patriarchate and declare himself free of, quote, the papal jurisdiction, unquote. It is no wonder that the Mar Zaya wrote to HBM ambassador at Constantinople to complain of Badger's interference. In any case, Mar Elijah would not cooperate. On 29 June 1845, the Record, an evangelical newspaper, charged that Badger was an emissary of the evil who was doing an incalculable degree of mischief. Before Badger's mission progressed further, by July 1843, Badir Khan Beg, Kurdish Emir of Bhutan, massacred many Assyrians. On 29th of July, the Patriarch Mar Abraham Shimon with several Assyrians came down to Mosul from the mountains. One of his brothers and his archdeacon Kasha Raham were with the Patriarch. The second attack was in October. Tiari was attacked this time. The total loss of Assyrians in the massacres of 1843 was about 10,000. The Patriarch, his brother and servants were accommodated with Barsaum, and the archdeacon with his family stayed with Badger. A brother of the Patriarch and others of his family fled to Urmia in the autumn of 1843. The American missionaries supported them, but in June 1844 the Assyrians boycotted the schools of the American mission. The Patriarch wrote from Mosul demanding the expulsion of the American missions. The cause of this quarrel was that the tracts printed by the press of the American missionaries in Mosul were contrary to the doctrines of the Assyrian Church of the East. Justin Perkins thinks that Badger was behind this instigation to remove his rival mission. Because the American missionaries about 1900 or onward tried to translate the King James Version into the Syriac, but botched it. Yeah, they went into Urmia and were doing mission work there, preaching, etc. They wanted to convert, or tried to convert, the King James Version into Syriac, but botched it. They messed it up totally. Although the mission of Reverend George Badger ended in 1845, the two British consuls, Richard Stevens, 1848-54, and Keith Abbott, 1854-68, took keen interest in the affairs of the Assyrians. In 1865, a group of Assyrians appealed directly to Queen Victoria. In 1868, Keith Abbott told the Syrians, "Do not turn Papist, do not turn Methodists, stay as you are. The Anglicans and the Nestorians have almost the same religion. The Queen will send you missionaries." So did she? Did Queen Victoria send them? Through the representation of the English consul and through fear of Russian influence, the authorities now promise the fullest redress of abuses to the Nestorians. For a time to come, there is a reasonable hope that the yoke will be lighter, and if the Nestorians had the manhood and self-control to act with unity and discretion, much might be done, but any permanent redress is very difficult and improbable. You will hear from Urmia whether any real good comes out of present promises. Way back in March 1862, the American missionaries had doubt that the Nestorians would join the Russian Church. We read in Herald and Recorder number 81, published from Chicago. The great event of the past month with us in Persia has been a decided movement toward Russia on the part of the Nestorians. It is not impossible that we may awaken some of these mornings and find the mass of the Nestorians for whom we labour in the bosom of the Russian Greek Church, and another morning may find us included in the map of Europe by an extension of the Russian flag over this province. And Second Anglican Mission came in 1876. Life was without any security. The Kurds often plundered the Assyrians. In 1897, Reverend F.F. Irving, Anglican missionary, 1893-98, writes of what he saw when he was going to Urmi. He was in Mawana, near Nokia, the headquarters of Metropolitan Mark Isaac Kanan Nishu. He saw on the road the Assyrian refugees, 123 adults with many children moving on the roads without enough clothes or shoes in the biting cold, and so forth. When Reverend F.F. Ewing and his colleague Mr. Nissan reached the vicinity of a small village of Musulmans and the Kurds, 4 Baghdadi made their appearance. They were fierce-looking, well-built fellows and armed to the teeth. When Mr. Nissan asked these Kurds whether they were not ashamed of demanding money from these refugees, they replied that we are guards of the road and must have our toll, but if you will give us a present we will be content. The English missionary writes, "This was of course pure imposition and only highway robbery in a polite form. We gave them 6 crowns, about half a crown. They took the money and graciously and insolently threw it on the ground at our horses' hoofs. We, however, firmly refused to give more, and after further parley they consented to accept it, but said they must also have the goat belonging to the party. This we told them was shame to them, and that we would on no account allow it." And here's some footnotes here. Yaru Michael Nissan, 1853 to 1937, was one of the earliest Assyrians to go to America. At the age of 28 or 29 in 1881, Jared went to America to study theology in order to become a missionary to his own people. The books published by different missionaries of that period, 1874, are as good as primary sources. These books may have the prejudices of their authors owing to their ecclesiastical affiliation, yet they are helpful in reconstructing a history of this ancient Church of the East. The Anglican authors have criticised the Presbyterian American authors. They in turn have assailed the Roman Catholics. It is understandable as each mission was trying to save this ancient church from its misery and heresy. So the list of the churches in the different areas, the different dioceses and the patriarchs. In Persia, Yonan, Bishop of Supergan, went to Russia to explore the possibility of merging with the Russian Orthodox Church if the Russian government could give protection from the Kurds and other Muslim groups to these Mesopotamians, I guess. They believed that only a Christian country could give them adequate protection from the Kurds and other Muslims among whom they live. A letter dated 4th April 1898 sent from Persia, preserved in the archives of the Archbishop of Canterbury in the Lambeth Palace Library, refers to the gravity of the situation in which the Assyrians found themselves in the urgent need of some help from the Christian nations like Russia and England. The condition of the Assyrian church at the end of the 19th century was quite unsatisfactory. The Assyrian Church of the East was expecting help from the foreign Christian countries for some help as a protection from the unfriendly Turks and Kurds. The Church of the East began to dwindle in their membership, although the Anglican missionaries did not convert the members of the old church. The American Presbyterian missionaries were keen on converting some members of this ancient church. The Americans considered this ancient church as a dead church based on the rituals rather than the faith of the Bible. The Americans conducted Bible classes and encouraged the Assyrians to accept a faith based on the precepts of the Protestants. The Assyrians used to call the evangelical Syrians the Americans. Later, the Reformed Nestorian Church eventually broke off from the old church and reformed an evangelical synod. The Persian government recognized the Reformed Church. Some travellers went around collecting money from the philanthropic Christians in the West. Some remarks made about the Assyrians by some foreigners are that of less than respect to them. The contact with the British and American missionaries helped them to learn English language, therefore they could travel to the West. The church began to dwindle in their membership, although the Anglican missionaries did not convert. The Assyrians, Americans converted some of them to Presbyterian, the French Lazarus converted some to Catholic, Chaldean and the Germans converted some of them to be Lutherans. The Russian Orthodox Church converted them to be Orthodox. In this process of religious proselytism, the Church of the East began to decline. Decline and murder of the Patriarch in 1900 and 1980, from Patriarch Reuvel Shimon until the murder of Patriarch Binyamin Shimon. Two of these were shot or assassinated. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Assyrians were under the rule of Patriarch Reuvel Shimon. The Kurds and Turks were persecuting his people. The Anglican missionaries were giving some small help to educate the Assyrians. The liturgical and secular books were being printed in the press of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The American Presbyterians were also doing their work in Persia among the Assyrians. The main difference in their approach was that the Presbyterians converted the Assyrians to their faith, while the Anglicans were doing their best to help the Assyrians and not start an Anglican church. It was a mission of help. Its intentions were to help and strengthen the Assyrians by educating the clergy and the laity. The Chaldeans were trying to gain an upper hand over the Assyrians. It is not easy to fix a date when the Assyrian church became smaller than the Chaldean church. The turn of the century was a probable period in which the Chaldean church grew numerically bigger than the Assyrian church. The American Presbyterians in Urmia area had started a male college called Urmia College with faculties of medicine, theology and arts and sciences, a female college named Fisker Seminary, 2 hospitals, one for men and one for women. Their mission press, installed in 1839, had printed by 1900 AD 3 million pages in both the Old and Modern Syriac. It's probably when the Urmia Bible was published after the 1900s, which was basically the American Bible translated into Syriac. Still trying to look for the part of this book where they split completely from the Roman Catholic Church and refused Mary worship, calling her the Mother of God, etc. Patriarch dies in 1903. Ma Binyamin Shamoun is the new patriarch. Is the new Catholicos Patriarch. Let's get some information on him here. Consecrated in 1884, cousin of the late Patriarch. Mashimun is a Papare, bishop of the nation and temporal ruler of 6 Asherit valleys, still independent of the Turkish yoke. The late Mashimun was very loyal to the Assyrian mission. Certainly on one occasion great promises were held out to him by the Dominicans if he would join the Roman Catholic Church. Gifts were sent by the American mission to induce him, or try to seduce him, to allow them a footing in Kurdistan. The inducements were held out by a gentleman at Oxford for him to form a Nestorian church in England, but Mashimun was firm. He didn't want that. As you can see, it's a very old book. It's very faded. In 1905, some Assyrians left the Russian Church to join the United Lutheran Church of America. It's talking about Patriarch Binyamin Shamun even further. Still trying to find when they actually broke away and revived the ancient church or whatever they were doing. Nothing here so far. Before the First World War, Wigram writes the happy outcome of the peaceful revolution. He comments here in Hakiari, a remote place, no change can come speedily. His further remarks touch upon the very relevant point, a very relevant point. The Anglicans do not. What's this down here? Footnote. It is possible that every time the enemy attacked the Assyrians, they must have had their valuable books hidden underground. Thus many manuscripts and letters are hidden in Turkey even today, because it mentions about some boys they were playing, and then when the Kurds came down to attack their village or whatever, they hid many of their books in the rocks from them, because obviously they would probably destroy them. If Hormizd were not killed in 1915, he would have been the Patriarch in 1918 when Binyamin Shamun was assassinated instead of his younger brother Polosi. Okay, more information there on different people, patriarchs, etc., metropolitans. The question of dropping the anathemas against Cyril of Alexandria, which has been a part of the concern in ecumenical discussion initiated by Pro-Oriente Vienna in recent years, was indeed a concern of Mar Isaac Ishuma Metropolitan, who died in 1918. The above report of W.A. Wigram comments as follows. Cyril of Alexandria with the debating Nestorius, and Nestorius saying that Christ was of two substances, had two natures, that he was both divine and man, human. And the Nestorian Church, erroneously called the Nestorian Church, the Church of the East, because they said they agreed with Nestorius and his hypostasis, that Christ had two substances, was of two substances, of two natures, both human and divine. They started calling him heretics, persecuting them, etc., etc. for many centuries, followed by the Mongols of Genghis Khan, the Kurds, ISIS, and Islam under the Caliphate. The Kurds massacred the Assyrians. This is where the Assyrians wanted to return to their old church. Want to break away from the Roman Catholics, etc. Didn't want to be influenced by them or under their boot heel. That testimony of the Assyrian Metropolitan about this English missionary, the late Dr. Brown, should be reproduced here. Only a brief portion of the letter written by Timotheus on November 22nd, 1910 from Syriac is quoted below. The late Dr. Brown was beloved of all the nation without doubt, and this I say not for the sake of saying it, but because I know nearly all of our small nation. And who but will say that this came from his love? He truly loved those that loved him, and they returned his love with a true love. That is, they knew and understood each other, and the cause of this will be clearly seen by all that wish to do so from his long stay in the mission. And by this account I do not understand why His Grace the Archbishop in the Church of England, who love the Syrians, do not make it more easy for his people to stay longer among us, that they may learn more about us and love us more. So did our dear friend. The penultimate paragraph of the letter is worth quoting, because there are still many people, not only in England or in Egypt, the land of Cyril of Alexandria, but also in other parts, who look down upon the Syrians as heretics. Timotheus appreciates the contribution of Mr. Brown in this aspect. Quite a lot of loss in the Shimun family by the looks of it. Practically there are very good reasons for the system, and the rule. Nestorian and Jacobite have been enemies too long for them to forget that enmity is a mere fact of submission to the Pope. And the mere suggestion that the Syrian Catholics ought to submit to Mar Emmanuel will probably send many of them, if not all, back to the Church of their fathers once more. So they are recognised at all events for the time being as separate churches and separate millets, and form practically separate communions. There again it seems to be two Catholic bishops in one place, both recognised Catholic, that's quoted, okay, which just means universal or global. Bishops in one place, both recognised, and such as neither of them subordinate to the other, yet neither of them in schism. Ingram seems to have a lot of mention here. As regards the Nestorians, whom the English missions specially attempt to assist, the hostility which a Roman Catholic prelate naturally feels to an independent church has led him into action of the most unscrupulous character. Rashid, the Kurdish chief, who recently destroyed 7 Christian villages in Tiari, received a regular subsidy from his mission funds. In the case of Chaldeans who wish to return to the ancient Nestorian church and be registered as members of it, their legal right, he has openly A. offered bribes to the men themselves to prevent this action, B. bribes Mussulman officials to refuse this right to men who persisted, C. employed terrorism for the same purpose, e.g. his agents have falsified registers and sworn to false information to secure that such, quote, returnees, unquote, should be enrolled as soldiers when long past the legal age. D. It will be in the recollection of some officials at the Foreign Office that in the month of January 1910 a mob attacked the house of the dragoman of the British Consulate in Mosul and threatened the life of an Nestorian bishop there. It was known that this mob was stirred up by the agents of the Patriarch and that he endorsed its action. Subsequently, he openly threatened the 2 English ladies who assisted in sheltering his intended victim. 3. Mar Emmanuel is the open ally of the most reactionary and corrupt cliché in Mosul. Of course, these facts suggest a prelate of the 16th rather than of the 20th century, and that is in fact the atmosphere in which we live here. He thinks that they are enough to prove that Mar Emmanuel is not the sort of person to whom King George would wish to show special honour, and so forth.